The Halo Effect and the 8 Other Business Delusions That Deceive Managers, by Phil Rosenzweig. Introduction. Imagine this: a company, soaring high, celebrated by everyone. Its CEO is hailed as a visionary, its strategy brilliant, its culture the envy of the industry. Year after year, it seems unstoppable, the darling of Wall Street, the company everyone wants to emulate. Then, almost overnight, the bubble bursts. Suddenly, that same visionary CEO is called arrogant. The brilliant strategy? Reckless. That enviable culture? Complacent, even chaotic. How could perceptions change so drastically, so quickly? Did the company itself fundamentally change in just a few months? Or was something else going on? This is the kind of puzzle that sits at the heart of the business world. A world filled with dramatic rises and devastating falls. It leads us to what author Phil Rosenzweig calls the mother of all business questions. Why do some companies succeed while others fail? It seems like a simple question, doesn't it? Yet, despite libraries full of books promising the secrets to success, the 6 steps to greatness, or the guaranteed formula for market domination, lasting success remains incredibly elusive. Why is it so hard to pin down what truly works? That's the journey we're embarking on today, guided by Phil Rosenzweig's insightful book, The Halo Effect and the 8 Other Business Delusions That Deceive Managers. This isn't just another book listing secrets, it's a book that pulls back the curtain on how we think about success and failure in business. Rosenzweig, a professor who has spent decades working with top executives, noticed a troubling pattern. Smart, experienced managers often fall prey to simplistic thinking, latching onto easy answers rather than digging deeper. His book acts as a guide for the reflective mind, helping us separate the valuable insights from the widespread nonsense that fills so many business bestsellers. He argues that much of our understanding is clouded by powerful delusions, errors in thinking that distort our perception of why companies perform the way they do. So, what's the promise for you today? By the end of our conversation, you'll understand the most powerful of these delusions, the halo effect, and see how it, along with 8 others, shapes almost everything we read and hear about business success. You'll gain a clearer, more critical way to think about performance, one that respects the complexities and uncertainties of the real world. Forget easy formulas. We're going to explore a wiser way to understand what truly drives success and failure. Let's begin. Book summary. Think about the Danish toy company, Lego. For years, they were kings of the construction block. But then, facing slowing sales and kids turning to video games, they tried branching out. Things like Harry Potter figures. When sales took a nosedive in 2003, the explanation echoed everywhere. Lego had strayed too far from its roots. The executive in charge was promptly fired. But was it really that simple? Rosenzweig asks us to pause. What exactly is a company's core? How far can it expand before it's straying? If Lego had only stuck to traditional blocks, wouldn't they have been criticized for being timid and missing opportunities when those sales inevitably flattened? Think about General Electric, which successfully moved far beyond light bulbs into financial services. No one called that straying because it worked. The words we use? Strayed, drifted, versus expanded or deftly maneuvered, often depend entirely on whether the move turned out well or poorly, judged only in hindsight. This Lego story perfectly illustrates the challenge Rosenzweig tackles. Why is it so incredibly hard to truly understand company performance? We desperately want explanations. When a company does well, we want to know the secret sauce. When it fails, we need a reason, a mistake to point to. We crave simple stories, neat cause and effect narratives. And this craving, Rosenzweig argues, makes us vulnerable to a powerful cognitive bias he calls the halo effect. What is the halo effect? It's the tendency to look at a company's overall performance, usually its financial results, because numbers seem concrete and objective, and then make attributions about other things that are harder to measure, like its culture, leadership, strategy, or customer focus. When a company is doing well, we see halos everywhere. We infer that it must have great leadership, a dynamic culture, brilliant strategy, and happy customers. But when that same company's performance drops, The halo vanishes, often replaced by horns. Suddenly, the same leaders seem arrogant, the culture complacent, the strategy flawed, and the customers neglected. Think back to Cisco Systems during the dot-com boom. As its stock price soared, making it briefly the most valuable company in the world, the business press couldn't praise it enough. CEO John Chambers was hailed as perhaps the world's best. Cisco was lauded for its laser-like focus on customers, its masterful skill at acquiring and integrating companies, and its unique, empowering culture. It was seen as nearly flawless. Then the bubble burst. Cisco's stock plummeted, and it had to write off billions in inventory. Suddenly, the stories changed dramatically. Fortune magazine, which just a year earlier asked if Chambers was the world's best CEO, now ran headlines like "Cisco fractures its own fairy tale." That laser focus on customers? Now Cisco was described as having a cavalier attitude that alienated people. Its legendary acquisition skill? Now seen as a binge on unproven startups, an acquisition free-for-all. The culture? Now described as arrogant, characterized by swagger and chaos. Did Cisco fundamentally change in just 1 year? Probably not that much. What changed was its performance. The halo disappeared, and observers simply rewrote history, making negative attributions based on the poor results. When performance later recovered, the narrative shifted again, praising the new discipline. Even though discipline was something praised back in the boom times. We saw the same pattern with ABB, the Swedish-Swiss engineering giant. Under CEO Percy Barnevik, ABB achieved stunning success in the late 80s and 90s through bold mergers and restructuring. Barnevik was treated like a rock star, a visionary, Europe's Jack Welch, humble yet decisive, a tireless worker. ABB's culture was dynamic, action-oriented. Its complex matrix organization was hailed as futuristic, a new form of global organization. Then, in the early 2000s, ABB stumbled badly. Hidden liabilities emerged, performance tanked, and the stock price collapsed. And just like with Cisco, the narrative flipped. Barnevik, once the hero, was now portrayed as arrogant, imperial, resistant to criticism. The bold culture? Now seen as impulsive and undisciplined. That innovative matrix organization? Suddenly remembered as chaotic, causing conflicts and duplication. Again, the company itself hadn't necessarily transformed overnight. The descriptions changed because the performance changed. The halo effect works both ways. It builds heroes when times are good and creates villains when things go bad. This bias isn't just in journalism. It's deeply human. Psychologists like Edward Thorndike identified it long ago when studying how army officers rated soldiers. Officers tended to rate soldiers they generally liked as good across the board. Physique, intelligence, character, even if those traits weren't related. It's easier for our minds to maintain a consistent picture. We see it in politics, where approval of a leader on one issue bleeds over into others. We see it in customer service surveys, where a quick resolution makes us remember the waiting time as shorter than it actually was. The halo effect makes it incredibly difficult to understand what truly drives performance because the factors we think are causes like great culture or leadership are often just attributions based on the results we already see. Rosenzweig argues this is just the first, and perhaps most fundamental, of 9 delusions that cloud our business thinking. Let's briefly touch on the others, as they often work together with the halo effect. Delusion 2. Correlation and causality. This is a classic trap. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other. Does high employee satisfaction lead to high performance? It sounds logical. Or does high performance being on a winning team lead to higher satisfaction? Research suggests the second effect is actually stronger. Without careful study over time longitudinal studies, we can easily mistake correlation for causation. Think of the old example. Ice cream sales and crime rates rise together in the summer. Does ice cream cause crime? No. A third factor? Warm weather? Likely influences both. Many business studies, and even consulting firm claims, fall into this trap. Delusion 3. Single explanations. We love simplicity, so we often attribute a company's success or failure to one single factor. brilliant leadership, or a strong culture, or amazing customer focus. But reality is complex. Many factors contribute to performance, and they are often highly interconnected. A study might show that market orientation explains 25% of performance, while another claims corporate social responsibility explains 40%, and yet another says human resources explains a significant chunk. Can we just add these up? Probably not. A company good at one is likely good at others too. These studies often exaggerate the impact of their chosen factor because they ignore the overlaps. Delusion 4. Connecting the winning dots. This is what happens when you study only successful companies and look for what they have in common. You might find they all have strong leaders or focus on customers, but maybe less successful companies do too. Without comparing winners to losers or at least less successful companies, you can't know what truly differentiates them. Tom Peters and Bob Waterman's famous book, In Search of Excellence, fell squarely into this trap. They identified excellent companies and then looked for common traits, which, unsurprisingly, were positive attributes likely influenced by the halo effect. Delusion 5. Rigorous research. This is the illusion created when studies boast about the sheer quantity of data collected, thousands of articles, hundreds of interviews, filling dozens of boxes. It sounds impressive, scientific even. But if the underlying data is flawed, perhaps contaminated by the halo effect from relying on biased press articles or retrospective interviews, then it doesn't matter how much of it you have. Stacking halos doesn't get you closer to the truth. Books like Built to Last, What Really Works, and Good to Great all emphasize their exhaustive research, creating this delusion. Delusion 6. Lasting success. We love the idea of building something that endures, a company that stays great forever. Books like Built to Last promise the secrets to achieving this, but Rosenzweig argues that lasting success is largely a myth, often identified only in retrospect. Most high-performing companies eventually regress towards the average. Why? Competition. Rivals imitate. New players enter. Technology changes. The economist Joseph Schumpeter called this the perennial gale of creative destruction. Studies show that market leaders often fade. Many of the excellent companies from In Search of Excellence and the visionary companies from Built to Last actually underperformed the market in the years after those books were published. The promise of a blueprint for lasting success is appealing but unrealistic. Delusion 7. Absolute performance. We often talk about companies succeeding or failing based on their own actions alone, as if they exist in a vacuum. But business performance is almost always relative. Your success depends not just on how well you do, but on how well you do compared to your rivals. Remember Kmart? During the 1990s, Kmart actually made significant improvements in many areas, like inventory management and technology. Its inventory turns improved by 32%. By absolute measures, it got better. But during the same period, Walmart improved even faster. Kmart fell further behind relatively, eventually landing in bankruptcy. Ignoring the competitive context gives a misleading picture. Delusion 8. The wrong end of the stick. This happens when we observe a characteristic of successful companies and mistakenly assume that the characteristic caused the success. Jim Collins, in Good to Great, argued that his great companies were like hedgehogs. They knew one big thing and pursued it with relentless focus. Maybe that's true. But does that mean being a hedgehog leads to success? Think about betting at a racetrack. The biggest winners at the end of the day probably made large bets on long shots hedgehogs. But does that mean betting on long shots is the best strategy for winning? Probably not. Many more hedgehogs likely went home broke. The average fox, who diversified bets, might have done better overall. Just because winners share a trait doesn't mean the trait guarantees winning. It might even be a high-risk approach that usually fails. Delusion 9. Organizational physics. This is the belief that business operates according to predictable, unchanging laws, like the laws of physics. If we could just discover these immutable laws, we could apply them anywhere and guarantee success. Books that promise formulas or blueprints often play on this desire for certainty. But business isn't physics. It involves people, choices, competition, luck, and constant change. There are no universal laws that guarantee outcomes. Pretending there are is reassuring, but ultimately misleading. So, if these bestsellers, despite their claims of rigorous research and scientific breakthroughs, are riddled with delusions, why are they so popular? Rosenzweig suggests it's because they work brilliantly as stories. They offer simple explanations for complex events. They provide inspiration and hope. They tap into deep narratives, like the rags to riches story that good to great echoes. They give managers a sense of control and a clear path forward, even if that path is illusory. Often, these stories are more appealing when dressed up in the language of science. Feynman's cargo cult science analogy comes to mind, where people meticulously copy the form of science runways, bamboo antennas without understanding the essence, hoping the cargo planes will land. But are these comforting stories harmless? Rosenzweig warns they can be dangerous. Believing in lasting success might make us complacent. Thinking performance is absolute might make us ignore competitors until it's too late. Grabbing the wrong end of the stick might lead us to adopt risky strategies without understanding the downsides. And believing in organizational physics might make us apply simplistic formulas where careful judgment and adaptation are needed. These delusions can lead managers to focus on the wrong things and make poor decisions. If we can't rely on these simple formulas and success stories, what's left? How should we think about achieving high performance? Rosenzweig suggests returning to basics, but with a clear understanding of uncertainty. He points to Michael Porter's framework. Performance depends on strategy and execution. Strategy is about making choices to be different from rivals. What markets to enter? What activities to perform? How to position against competitors? Crucially, Rosenzweig emphasizes, strategic choices are always inherently risky. Why? Because the future is uncertain. Customer reactions are hard to predict. Competitors react in unpredictable ways. Technology shifts can disrupt entire industries, often in ways that established players don't see coming. Christensen's disruptive technologies. And even our own organization's ability to pull off a new strategy is never fully known. Causal ambiguity. Many bestsellers downplay this risk, suggesting any focused strategy will work if communicated well, or focusing excessively on getting the right people first and figuring out the strategy later. Good to great. Rosenzweig argues this ignores the tough reality that some strategic choices are simply better than others in a given context, and even the best choices involve uncertainty. Success often looks brilliant in retrospect, but at the time, it was usually a calculated gamble. Execution is about carrying out those strategic choices effectively, mobilizing resources, building products, serving customers, managing operations. While execution might seem more controllable because it happens inside the company, it's still uncertain. Organizations are complex social systems, not machines. What works perfectly in one company, with its unique people and culture, might not work the same way elsewhere. Idiosyncratic contingency. That's why even rigorous studies often find that specific management practices explain only a modest portion of performance differences, like the 10% found by Bloom and Dorgan. Rosenzweig warns against vague calls for flawless execution. It sounds good, but it's meaningless without specifics. Better to identify the few key execution priorities crucial for your strategy, like Larry Bossidy did at Allied Signal. Also, beware the tendency to blame poor execution when the real problem might be a flawed strategy. It's often easier to demand people work harder than to question the fundamental direction. Rosenzweig highlights leaders like Robert Rubin, former Goldman Sachs head and Treasury Secretary, Andy Grove Intel, and Guerrino De Luca Logitech as examples of this clear-eyed approach. Rubin explicitly embraced probabilistic thinking, constantly evaluating odds and understanding that even well-calculated risks sometimes lead to losses. Grove navigated Intel through multiple strategic inflection points, making high-stakes bets on new technologies with full awareness of the risks, famously believing only the paranoid survive. De Luca emphasizes making conscious strategic choices, including saying no often, focusing on specific execution priorities, and constantly fighting complacency, knowing success is never guaranteed. These managers don't rely on coconut headsets. They don't expect cargo planes full of success to land just because they followed a formula. They engage with the messy, uncertain reality of business, make the best judgments they can, push hard for execution, and understand that luck plays a part. They strive not for certainty, but for improving their chances in a competitive world. Commentary. Phil Rosenzweig's The Halo Effect is like a splash of cold, clear water in a world often intoxicated by simple success formulas. It doesn't give you a neat checklist for becoming the next great company, and for some, that might feel disappointing. But what it offers is arguably far more valuable: intellectual honesty and a framework for clearer thinking. The most powerful takeaway, for me, is the relentless exposure of the halo effect itself. Once you truly grasp how easily our perception of specifics like leadership or culture gets colored by overall performance, you start seeing it everywhere. Not just in business articles, but in sports commentary, political analysis, even in how we judge people in our daily lives. It forces a level of critical thinking that's often missing when we consume stories of success and failure. We become less likely to blindly idolize winners or harshly condemn losers without considering the context, the competitive pressures, and the role of chance. Rosenzweig isn't saying that things like good leadership, strong culture, or customer focus are unimportant. He's saying that our measurement and understanding of these things are often deeply flawed, tangled up with the performance outcomes they're supposed to explain. This distinction is crucial. It pushes us away from vague attributions and towards looking for concrete actions, specific strategies, and measurable execution, things less susceptible to the halo's glow. The book's critique of popular business bestsellers is sharp, but fair. It reminds us that books promising secrets or laws of success often prioritize compelling storytelling over scientific rigor. While inspiration has its place, relying on potentially flawed frameworks built on delusions like lasting success or absolute performance can lead managers astray. The real world of business is dynamic, competitive, and uncertain. Pretending otherwise doesn't help navigate it. So, how can you apply these ideas? First, become a more critical consumer of business stories. When you read about a successful company, ask yourself, are the explanations given great culture, visionary leader, truly independent causes, or could they be halos resulting from the success itself? Look for concrete evidence beyond glowing descriptions. Second, when evaluating your own work or the performance of your team or company, consciously try to separate outcomes from the decision-making process. Ask, was the decision sound based on the information available at the time, even if the outcome wasn't ideal? What can we learn about improving our process of making choices and executing them, regardless of luck? Third, embrace the uncertainty. Recognize that strategy involves calculated risks, not guarantees. Focus on making the best possible choices to improve your odds, rather than searching for a non-existent foolproof plan. Similarly, focus execution efforts on the specific, measurable priorities that matter most for your strategy, rather than just vaguely trying to execute better. Ultimately, the halo effect encourages a shift from seeking simple formulas to cultivating wisdom, the ability to think critically, understand context, weigh probabilities, and act decisively despite uncertainty. It's a less glamorous path than following a supposed blueprint to greatness, but it's one grounded in reality, and likely far more effective in the long run. That was our deep dive into the halo effect by Phil Rosenzweig. We've explored the core delusions that shape how we perceive business success and failure. While this summary gives you a strong sense of the book's critical insights, it's really just the beginning. The true value comes from engaging directly with Rosenzweig's arguments and examples. If the idea of cutting through the hype and thinking more clearly about what truly drives performance resonates with you, I highly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning concepts, it's about sharpening your own judgment and becoming a wiser observer of the business world around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. And if you found this exploration helpful, please show some support by liking this summary and subscribing to Billionaire's Bookshelf. We bring summaries of impactful books like this regularly, aiming to help you build your knowledge and perspective. Join us next time as we unpack another powerful book together. Let's keep learning and growing.